The Book of Remembrance of our ancient grandmothers. Page 53. The Book of Remembrance, Our Ancient Grandmothers, Chapter 2, an account of the first grandmother, Emery, and her joining for the Lord, and also the righteous establishing themselves in the land of Qatar, and of Michael, establishing the continuations of the spiritual heritage of Eden to all mankind. And it came to pass that I once again sat before the urn and beheld that little Kenna was absent before his parents, which he was asked to help put the sheep away for the night, and he refused and stomped his feet. And I began to look with an earnest heart, for I knew the Lord was once again continuing to reveal to me the wonders of what he did to set about accomplishing his task, to prepare the world of his father for a long duration, so that the purposes of Anakased would be preserved upon the earth. And I saw Micah, son of Yatsuka, viewing his older brother Kenna and his continuing waywardness and rebellious behavior. And of all her children, Micah is the most like his mother Kaba in her innocence and mildness of heart. And Micah, too, cannot anticipate evil, and he is very dismayed and confused by the emotion of discord, and so much that when he is exposed to it, he retreats away and busies himself with something to distract his tender heart. And he is called Micah because of his innocence and mildness in righteousness. And more than any other of the children of Kaba, he is the most tender-hearted, and he desires to only surround himself with the feelings of Eden. And even though he has not been there, he knows full well what they are, because he is joined fully in the spirit to his mother Kaba. And because of this, he has inherited her gift of prophecy. And his brother Azon, whose name means to enlarge the ears with the hands, desires only to walk in his daily walk in feelings of the spirit of childlikeness. And when he encounters discord, it seems to him that the flow of life is interruption. And in this way, he clings to his older brother, Micah, for he shelters him from discord, and they often retreat away together in quietness of heart. And it can be seen that the greatest desire of Azon, all of his life, is for him and his heart to be always found, to be living in such a way as to be intimately guided by the spirit of harmony. And he often can be heard by others, conversing by himself with Matzah the lamb, while in the act of his daily labors. And I could see by Urim that speaking out loud to the Lord while in the presence of others was common in the people of that day. And Azar is very diligent to avoid anything that would distract or inhibit the tranquility of the close walk with the Lord. And for this reason, he is grateful for his companionship with Micah. And the two of them love their parents with a profound affection. And it came to pass that I saw at the time of the death of Mattaniah, Abel, Michael is married and has many children, and he is dependent upon by his family to guide them in every way towards the holiness, as was found in Eden. And he is a big man and gentle and much loved by his family. And I marveled to look upon him because both his parents were little. And the wife of Micah is named Aruka, and she is the daughter of Kava, and she is little and very sweet. And gracious, and carries a pleasant countenance. And the name of Aruka means the one who can restore happiness. And I do not know how anyone could be around such a person and not be happy. And it came to pass that in those days, Yatsika and Kava are found to be herding the sheep of their slain son, Mataniah. And I see them walking in the valley of Simca, where they first meet, but now they have named it the valley of Joash, for it has become the valley of their grief, as it is the valley of Mataniah was killed, and his bones lay upon the ground, for no one knew what to do with them. And the entire ravine was a place to be avoided by all. And everyone knows that their old parents weighed down in their grief, and they are seen to be faithful to their duties in the care of his sheep in spite of it. And Micah is in despair, and it is distraught over the mourning of his parents. And about the time when his parents were in the deepest grief, Micah is also overcome, and he has lain down upon his bed and refusing to get up or eat. And Aruka found him on his bed, but he will not get up for her. And Aruka is alarmed, and she must confer with others to find out what to do. And as it is her custom, she was troubled. She seeks out her sister Emery. And the name Emery means one who is prominent and one who walks on mountains, in finding her guidance from the Lord. And often Emery is viewed by her family as one who can seek the Lord and ask him direct questions and find guidance for them, because she seems to be able to know the desires of Anakased. And she has learned to speak clearly and resolutely about what his desires are. And she is the first person to put language to process of hearing the Holy Spirit. And all the people have come to depend on her in the time of need. And even though she is the youngest daughter of Kava at this time, she is influential by the way of her example to assist those around her to seek the Spirit of the Lord for specific guidance in their daily walk, and she can witness effectively. And Matzah and the Lamb will answer the very questions of her heart by the power of the Holy Spirit. And she has accounts of times when she has appeared to her and counseled her in the way. And this was the vision of Emery. The Lord began to bring me understanding, for I saw that for most of the children of Yatsika and Kava, there was in their minds the perception that they all had left Anakased behind in Eden. And Emery was very charitable and unassuming. And even though her parents did not have the language to explain to her how they were guided by the Holy Spirit, she could discern by her strong intuition what was happening to them when the Spirit was speaking to them, and she developed the language to tell others. And from her, the personal dynamics of being led by the Holy Spirit began to influence others. And from her, it spread abroad to all the ancient righteous peoples. And thus we see that through this innocent little sweetheart, Matzah the Lamb was able to do his work. And Emery is the first of 7 grandmothers Matzah used in his task. And she joined mankind to the Holy Spirit Kahi. And it came to pass that I saw it was her custom to walk on the upper reaches of the northwestern slopes of Mount Mahia above Node, when she wished to find out the desires of Nakasid. And it was made known to her that starting with this wondrous woman came to traditions that the governing guidance of the Lord is the mountain of the house of the Lord. And this tradition has been supported by the prophets. And upon hearing the anxiety of Aruka for her husband, Emery went up upon the side of the mountain. She remained there for 3 days. All the people were anxiously waiting for her to come back. And during the time Michael was lying on his bed in his distress, and those in the encampment were expecting of what news she would bring. And it came to pass in the evening of the third day, while many are gathered around the fire, Emery came quietly into their midst, and she embraced Aruka and sat down in the light of the fire. And after a while, she began to speak and said, "The Lord Matza the Lamb walked with me on the mountain, and he spoke tenderly to me there. And by his presence, a vision of comfort was opened up to me, and I beheld a wonderful mountain far to the west. And the mountain there spoke to me tranquility and peace. And she cited the vision for them, and they could all feel the truth of her words. And she said that the great mountain has sparkling sea lying beside it, and across the sea was a beautiful, peaceful valley. And upon the southern mountain was the smaller sea. And she continued and said, as I looked at this wondrous sight, the Lord said to me that it was the desire of his heart that my car take his family and travel into the setting sun. And if he does, he will find this mountain and sea and valley, and he will find new life there. And that in his way, Markar and his family would render a great service to Matzah the Lamb. And when he arrives, he is to seek out the body of pure water upon the upper reaches of this mountain. And he said that Anaka said, and the Urkadeshkoi would be well pleased if he would kindle a fire there and offer up to Anaka said the odors of sweetness out of the thankfulness of his heart for being led there by the kind hand of Matzah the Lamb. And the mountain there was eagerly awaiting them, for none of the children of Yatzikah had spread themselves there. And the Lord said he would safeguard the tranquility of the place for many generations. And Emery said that in her vision she saw that the land was bountiful and would bless them with abundance. And it came to pass, and upon hearing all these things, Aruka went and told Makar the news, and he was invigorated, and he rose, and he came himself to hear the account from Emery. And they spoke together all throughout the night, and Makar began to eat again. And in the course of the few days, Yatsika and Kava returned home, and they bore record that Matzah the Lamb had appeared to them to comfort them, and all the feelings of their experience of the joys of eating returned to them while he spoke to them. And the waters of Simcha comforted them in the desires to return to Eden. And upon hearing this account of his parents, Makar felt his joy once again of the expectation of the returning to Eden someday. And he went up to the place near to where his parents first met. And he picked up a stone out of the water of Simcha, for he supposed in his heart that in his departing to go to the west, he would find upon his arrival this special edition of Eden. And you will see that he was not to be disappointed in the expectation. And he told Aruka that he now had a rock of witness to take the feelings of Eden with them when they would depart westward. And this special witness would accompany them in all their travels. And the stone was white stone, and it was round and smooth and flat, and about the size of a hand of a man. And Aruka made a special pouch to carry it in. And from that day forward, Makar wore it as his side everywhere he went. And it came to pass that in those days, plans began to be made for the departure into the springtime. And after enough food was put by for the journey, and Makar and Aruka and their children all made ready to travel according to the voice of the Lord. For the Spirit bore strong witness to account of memory. And it came to pass that I saw with Urim that Micah and Azan were inseparable, and Azan is very troubled at the prospect of the departure of Micah, and Azan is not yet recovered from the effect of the flight of so many of his brothers and sisters with families. And he often sees the tear-stained face of his parents as they think about the children having left. And now Micah and Aruka are going away also, and he cannot discern what the Lord is saying to him in his heart. And after many quiet walks in prayer, he has determined that he will depart with Micah. And Azan began to put by his provision for his journey, and Mata the lamb gave him a dream. And in the dream, he saw that he needed to put by a double portion of provisions. And when he awoke, he wondered why, but he then began to be in earnest to provide the journey. And as I looked with I can see Emery weeping in the shadows of the firelight. And she is very distressed at the thought of the departure of Azan as she is crying. For she loves her brother Azan very deeply. And in her heart, she has determined to seek out her father. And she followed the signs of his travels upon the earth. And she found him sitting upon a rock in the rushing water of Simca, and he is quietly singing a song of Eden. And when she found him, she rehearsed the matter of her despair to him. And she said, Father, as you know, the Lord has guided Micah to depart in the western lands, and now Azan will go with him. And oh, Father, I have come to you because if Azan leaves, I do not know how I can live. What is wrong with me? And upon hearing this, Yatsika smiled upon her and said, when you were born, we named you Emery because we knew that you would be one who would walk closely with Anakaset, and you would be able to ask him questions and hear his answers clearly. But we did not see whose rib you were. But I see now that you and Azan have the same purposes of Anakaset that are joined as to hearing, as you both walk through life with special joining to the spirit of Kahi as your companion. Perhaps you are his rib. And Emery rose up in her delight and said, Father, I have known this, but I was afraid to speak of it, for I did not know such things of certainty, Father. Tell me again how you and mother became married on the day that Anaka said, worship with you. And Yakuza said, rehearse to her all that transpired at the rocks of Simca. And on that day, Anaka said, married them. And the news of the great delight to Emery. And she sprang up to her upon her feet and stepped over to stand in the water and made joyous sounds before the Lord. And she declared that she would do likewise and become the wife of Azan. And old Yatsukat smiled upon her and said, what about Azan? Does he know of this? And it came to pass that Yatsukat accompanied her, and they went back so she would speak with Azan. And the news of it was spread abroad, and many were filled with joy for them. And those who would depart were delighted, and they all could go together. And now Azan knew why the Spirit counseled him to put double. And Kava looked upon all this only as a mother could, seeing more of her children departing away from Nod. But she found comfort knowing that the Lord was directing the paths in the ways of righteousness for his own special need. And after those days, a wedding was planned. And it came to pass that when the days arrived for the wedding, all was in readiness. And it took place at the rocks of Nod, which stood by the lower pools. And I saw that Cawthon was young, and he watched with keen interest at that which transpired at the wedding worship there. And his heart was filled with the spirit of Anakasid. And he wept for joy. And he did this because his spirit was fully engaged with his vision of creative purpose. And the name Cawthon means to give in marriage. And he thereby could discern by the spirit the effect of the element of righteousness that Anakasid used in this worship had on the spirit of life, both with those being married and on the Deshkoi. And he discerned that it was by these elements that man and wife were introduced to the Deshkoi, and thereafter known to them to be living in the sanctity of marriage. And it could well comprehend that everything holy in creation respected that which Anakised had joined that day. In all creation, there was a great determination to support them and to bring protection to those who live in the pure sanctity of marriage. And with this special young man, there was for the first time one who fully understood what it meant to bear witness to all the holy spirits of life in the earth. The true meaning of creation, for creation will become complete by the joining together in perfect holiness of man and his rib in the sanctity of marriage. And I know that when those who walk in darkness pollute and corrupt the sanctity of marriage with lust, fornication, or violence, or make it to be something other than one man, one woman, it pleases the enemy of all that is good. And it came to pass that after the wedding, Cathan went alone before the Lord, and he made a vow that he would see to it that all his people for perpetual generation would always be found to be walking in the sanctity of marriage, and that they would engage in no lust of fornication as Kenna and Kawa had done, but would faithfully walk circumspectly in chastity and purity of heart in the time preceding their marriage, and that afterwards they would diligently maintain the holy state for the rest of their lives. And I could see clearly the starting point for the degradation of women in society began with fornication, and among the wicked it grew in the horror of it until women became simply something to own. And I remembered that Kenna was filled with lust, and that it was the principal power of Store, the decadent, had over him. And he wanted the wife of his brother Mattaniah, who was named Sephi. And Masor, the decadent, had whispered in his ear that it would empower him in the desires of his heart for him to have twin wives, who were Sapphire and Azara. And Awen was in like manner deceived by the powers of evil to become wayward from that which Anakised had established, the sanctity of marriage in Eden. And it came to pass that Caiathan spoke to Anakised and asked him to help him and always see to it that their marriage would commence with the same worship of marriage that was established by the very hand of Anakised in the perfection of Eden. And he knew that Nashim, his sister, had been seen at her birth to be his rib, and he patiently waited for her decision in the matter. And the name of Nashim means simply a woman who is the wife of a man. And I saw her to be perfect model of a wife, and in the sight of Anakised, and she said she is both selfless and assertive in her womanhood. And it came to pass that Caiathan inquired diligently of his parents concerning all the matters of the marriage worship, and he wanted to know all the particulars thereof. And he found that Azan and Emery had neglected to give each other espousal gifts, and he discovered that his parents had forgotten the wedding song, and it was lost to them all because Yatsika and Kaba did not know it was a part of that which Anakised was doing, because the singing of it sprang out of their hearts so naturally, but it was restored again by Enoch when the Lord taught him how to divide the sons of men, and Cathan considered that it was part of that which Enoxat was doing when he established that a woman was not to sit on a bed or bedding with any man until the day of her wedding. And this must be observed by all girls from the early childhood, and it was established by Enoxat in Eden. And it came to pass that in the springtime, when all was prepared and ready, Makar and Azan and their families departed westward, and Yatsik found Kaba high upon the cliffs of Nod, watching from them depart until they were out of sight. And she wept, and he sat with her, and he held her, and he tried to comfort her by telling her that it was for a wise purpose in the Lord that they were departing. And I must say, as I looked upon them with that I saw the mother of the living, and she was an elegant lady, and she bore children for a period to exceed 70 years. Oh, how Enoxat loves her, and has tenderly upheld her and Yatsika through all their trials. And I watched with them those that were departing, and I knew that the Lord had moved them with his spirit to perform a vital function for him in the task that lay before them. And he brought comfort to our first parents in their mourning, how rich will be their reward. And it is not known that the first parents of a people bequeath the nature of the virtues of their personalities to their offspring for many generations. And often it can be seen that their personal traits can endure among their people for entire pathways of the earth. Thus, it can be supposed that the people leaving west towards the setting sun would take with them the traits of personality that would be long embedded into the region where they arrived. And our old parents watched them until it was too dark to see, and they made their way back to their encampment. And Kaba supposed she may never see nor hear from them again. And this had happened to them before, when the children fled out of fear, and they offered prayers of Tamatse in their behalf for a blessing upon them. And it came to pass that the company traveled gently, and they passed through the lands that they had never been seen before by any man. And they persisted into the travels every day, and they did not encounter any other person, and nothing threatened them. And they could see Mount Huya diminishing away from them in a distance as they looked back. And now, after some time, they began to view a wonderful mountain which lay before them. And by the fall time, they came to the great sparkling sea, and they looked upon it from the east side, and it glimmered in the setting sun. And they named it Shaman Sea, because it sparkled in the sun. And it came to pass that they tarried there, and they put provisions by and made the dwellings for themselves to allow them to stay through the winter. And they spied out the land across the sea, and they found a large spacious valley. And they sent young men over there to see what could be known about the place. And upon their report, when they returned, they determined to go there in the spring. For the young man said, there is a marvelous river of water in the valley that ran a course into the sea. And all the people were well pleased with the news, and they named the river in the new home the Pashan River, because they were dispersed out of Moladeth to find it by the kind hand of Enoxat. And it came to pass that the people of Makar and Azan came to encamp along the river. And they hunted and caught fish, and Makar was intent to find the waters of purity, and upon the higher reaches of the mountain that Emry had seen in her vision. And Makar ascended up upon the south mountain from the valley, and there he found the high mountain sea. And now when he had kindled a fire, he put it upon a large flat flat stone, and he offered up sweet odors to Anakset for guiding them in the way. And then he ascended upon the summit of the great mountain, and he named the mountain Mount Qatar, for it afforded them a place of safety and refuge from mourning, and it was a guardian of their new home. And when he had rested a while, he took the stone he had brought, which had come from the land of the parents of Eden, and he found one just like it in Mount Qatar, and he laid them side by side upon the altar, and he introduced the mountain to each other, and he instructed them in all their behaviors towards one another, and in all they would do in relation to righteousness. He instructed Mount Qatar, and it was to follow the example of Mount Mahua, and the duty of it in protecting the people who came there from the land of Moladeth. And Mount Qatar and Mount Mahahuya had watched each other since Olam, and now they were friends together, and both had contributed a white stone as the element of righteousness to declare that the feelings of Eden would be shared by them both in behalf of the righteous people, and Micah knew it not. But the meaning of the white stone is that he was declared by Anakset to be worthy to perform this task for him. And this is the spirit that gives such stones life. And he dedicated Qatar and all the regions around about to be a place where the spirit of Eden would shine forth in their knowledge and purity to all inhabitants of the earth until the end thereof. And he did this by a sure hand, using the element of righteousness of the stones. For you will see that it will take millennia of time to weaken the spirit, but it will never leave altogether. By this shall mankind be blessed by the Kadeshkor, if they will honor Anakset, and the sparkling sea bore witness. And the righteousness of the man, Micah, has established a sure foundation for Shavuah, to arise up within creation, proceeding forth from the regions of Qatar, because now all of the Kadeshkor, by the active introduction, learn to expect that righteous men would instruct them in that way. And it was a spiritual heritage that carried on the son of Noah, and from him to all righteous mankind. And my heart was filled with satisfaction to learn this truth, and I felt a joining in my soul to those my ancient people, and these two majestic mountains have conferred together many times concerning Shabuah. And from where Micah stood at his altar, Mount Mahuya could be seen in the misty distance eastward, and I behold that this was a very place I viewed when I first looked with Urim. And in this place I was put back to where I began, and the Lord had answered my questions. And it came to pass the encampment of the people along the river prospered, and the gift of life from Anakset to mankind was the delight for him. And he gazed upon his children, and the people established themselves and began to fill the valley. And they had no sheep, but they had Isib in abundance. And in those days, Makar was lonesome for his parents. And we heard reports concerning the high places to east, and he would take a journey to the high places above the Shaman Sea. For he was one who was raised on high shoulders of Mahuya, and the low plain of the valley seemed to him to be too closed in. And it came to pass that he discovered a place in the high hills where he thought he might be able to see the silhouette of Mahuya. And in his heart he rejoiced to behold the gate of Eden, and his happiness was made full. And Aruka
rejoice in the restored happiness of her husband, and she immediately began to settle in to establish themselves there upon the high places. But Azan and Imri dwelt in the valley by the river, and when she wanted to walk up upon a high place, she had only to look about at the mountains surrounding the valley, and go there as she found need. Howbeit were several days' journey for her, but she was a traveler, and the people were delighted to ever walk in the spirit and the pleasantness of the land. And after those days, about 85 years passed in peace in Qatar. But during the fourth generation since Eden, the offspring of Kenah and many of the people of Tower, who knew not the Lord, Matzah, the Lord, began to sally forth to inhabit the lower reaches of the eastern side of the Shaman Sea. And they were a hard people who knew not the kind of ways of Anakase, and they dwelt with a high level of commotion and contention among themselves. And I could see that illness began to be introduced to the family of mankind, and there was anger, despondency, and laziness. And the people wore cotton garments, and they took pride in their appearance and status among themselves. And their women began to try to beautify themselves. And the role of women among the wicked continued to spiral downward. And should any of the wicked come into the right regions of Qatar, the righteous would fade quietly away into the hills and distant places to not be discovered. And the wicked greatly feared them by the reason of their many superstitions and because of the view that they were a wild, backwards, and primitive people. And the people of Tyre did not dare to seek them out, and soon the entire valley was forbidden to them by the reason of their fears. And so the fear, the wicked had the regions around Mahuya and began to now extend to Qatar. And I wonder if the worship of Makar at his altar on the high place had brought this about. And because Makar lived in the high places of the earth, he was secluded and found contentment. But the people who lived in the valley were sometimes in distress and were obliged to retreat from strangers. And any place where those strangers lived was called Tower by the people of Azan and Makar. By the northernmost far distant great valley was named Helia by the people of Qatar. And it was named this because it was far distant and removed from the loving kindness of Anakase. And it came to pass that the righteous began to be thought of as fearsome by those of Tower, because they could not comprehend the ways of holiness and humility. And the Qataris were never known to act in rudeness before the great one of heaven. And thus the Lord began to answer me about how there could be a righteous people here in Tower. And my eyes beheld the foundation laid by Matzah to preserve the purposes of his Father in creation. At the time when people would return to Eden, it can now be readily seen that Maustor, the decadent, was also making his plan, and you will see that the foundations of the evil nations are being set in place. And all this was a marvelous thing for me to learn. And it came to pass that the Lord continued to open up my eyes with and I saw that he was preparing a people who would follow the ways of his heart in the temporal world for an untold generation. And they would be a people of his choosing in a special way, intended to bring endurance to all things good in the world, where the righteous and the wicked would be intermingled during all the course of the earth, and they would be people suited to bring assistance to him in his task to preserve the world for his father, Anakisid. And I saw the foundation laid by him, them would continue in succeeding generations to uphold and sustain the purposes of his father in creation after the flood took place, and which our mother Kava prophesied at the birth of Enoch. And it came to pass that I saw Micah was a visionary man and a prophet, for he loved the Lord and he saw visions in with clarity. And he had his gift because he was joined in his spirit to the vision of his mother. And when Micah left to go to Qatar, he thought he would find Eden, and to a large measure he did. But when evil began to encroach upon the people there, his yearnings increased. And it was interesting to me that throughout his account, Makar, the first person perceived as a prophet. And I thought about these things. I understood that in the ancient mind, a seer and a prophet were all two altogether different callings. For a seer saw all he did in the prophecy of his own life that pierced time and place to bring understanding. A prophet spoke things that had an immediate effect upon those in the present moment, which dealt with which was unknown when it was spoken, except by inspiration, with the expectation of greatly influencing important life decisions. And it came to pass that in his concern, he went to his rock where he prayed. And by the example of Emery, Micah was determined to find answers for Massa the Lamb so he could bring to his people understanding. And his intention was to build a defense between evil and his people because they had hid themselves more and more from the wicked of Tower. And it came to pass that after much earnest prayer, that the Lord spoke to him with his guiding spirit. And he said, Micah, my son, in the land of Moladeth, there is a man named Canaan, and his wife is called Shamar, and she shall bear a son, and he shall be named Mahel, and he shall be one that will bring Qatar the greatest establishment of 70 that the mother of the living established at the altar of Yahtzee. And even as I am fountain of forgiveness and river of purity and clear spring of living water, welled up and spilling over, even so shall I flow in the land of Qatar to follow with all my loved ones here. And the one named Mahel shall influence the righteous to love me with a deep, profound personal love. And I will go out with them. And my presence will accompany them. And I will establish for a long-standing foundation among them the love of repentance, the joys of forgiveness, the peace that comes from knowing the truth and loving kindness. And you will see the 70 of Kaaba will become expanded because of this love for me, to engulf all creation in the 11th generation in order to safeguard all the purposes of Anakised in creation by one who will be called Melchizedek. And your people must come to know me and turn in all their doings towards me and come to view all that I made to them. I mean to them. And I say to you that one named Mahel, who Shamar will bear, will be an instrument in my hand to accomplish it. And it is important that my son, Mahel, should be raised up to me here in Qatar. So send word to them by messenger, and bid them to come to Qatar with the little son. Now the name Shamar means one who is diligent in all her decisions and careful in their duties. And she is a special handmaid to me. and one who can join the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to the father. And Canaan, her husband, very gracious, and he is resilient in the face of turmoil and discord. And he is very skilled at loving in spite of sin, and those who stumble find in him solace, and he is tolerant and understanding. And because of this, he is often sought out by those who need comforting. And it came to pass that sometime after, in the land of Nod, Shamar gave birth to a little son. And on the day when the child was to be word came to there was a messenger from the west who had come, and he now waited at the place of water. And the people sent one to greet him and inquire as to his desire. And after he was fed and rested, he came near to the dwelling of Canaan and Shamar, where there was a body of people assembled. And he said that he was sent from Makar, and immediately they sent word for Yatzaka and Kaba to come. And after a while, their old parents came into their midst, and the messenger was warmly received, and the man held his peace, and until they arrived, and he was greatly moved to look upon the first parents of all men. And the Spirit of the Lord swept over him, and he sang a song that Yatzaka said was heard in Eden. And his news was eagerly received by our old parents, and they delighted to hear a word of their children. And the messenger was enlisted, and he reported some of the words that the Lord had said to Makar. And he told them that the name of the new son, and the Lord had said to Makar, and he said the name of the child was Mahel. And in the course of the time, he would come to be called Mahel Ashri, which is to say, Mahel the mighty, both in word and in loving kindness. And the messenger withheld speaking and waited for passing of a few days. And when he quietly came, he sat by the dwelling of Shemar. And after a while, he was asked to speak again. And they brought the mantle of Canaan to put it over him. And they asked him to speak. And he told the rest of the message from Makar. And he told Canaan and Shamar what the Lord had said, and regarding the desire of the Lord for the child to be brought to Qatar, to be raised up there for a special purpose for the Lord, which had to do with the living water of Mata the Lamb entering strongly into the regions of Qatar, and that he would be the father generations of the righteous. And he would said that his grandfather Makar was much moved upon with the prospect of it. And Canaan and Shamar listened intently, and when they inquired as to when the messenger received this message and the name of Makar and set out, they found it had taken him 4 months to complete his journey. And word was spread concerning this, and the people were amazed. And the messenger had set out so many days before his travels, and yet he arrived on a very day that the child was to be named, with a name for it. And when he had first arrived, he was taken into the assembly that had gathered to the name of the child. And his grandmother Azura was set to name him Afri. So the child was born with 2 names, and the name Mahel means one who has authority to separate chaos out of the midst of the people. And now it came to pass that Shamar asked the messenger many questions, and he told her clearly the living conditions of Qatar, the pleasantness and the abundance of the land, and also concerning those who inhabited towers surrounding them. And he disclosed to them concerning the 2 white stones used by Makar, and this was news to them all. And the messenger was obliged to stay in the encampment over the winter season. And Canaan and Shamar sought the Lord with diligence during that time. And it came to pass that in the spring, the Lord appeared to Shamar and her husband in the night when all were asleep around them. And he comforted them, and he found and he would go with them into the new land, and he opened up the eyes of Shamar to see the vision of the created purpose of her little son Mahel. And she gazed upon a very pure and sweet fountain of water, and multitude of people, and the water reeds moving with rejoicing. And the Lord said to her that that blessing without number would come to the people of Anakased during the course of man, from their family being willing to sojourn in Qatar. And it came to pass that in the spring the child was able to travel, and they prepared to set out for the land of Qatar. And Yatsika took up little Mahal in his arms, and he said prayers of blessing over him. And he praised Matzah the Lamb that the feeling of Eden were to come to the land of the setting sun. And he said that the gateway to heaven could be heard singing, and that they departed being led by the messenger. And they had to be discreet because the eastern border of the Shaman Sea was inhabited by those of Tyler. And it came to pass that they arrived safely to the south rolling hills of Shaman Sea. And the messenger went on ahead to announce their arrival. And when he returned, he led them to the settlement by the river, and Makar came down from his dwelling in the high places to meet him. And the meeting was sweet indeed, for the Spirit of the Lord attended them in full measure. And Makar took up little Mahal in his arms, and he bestowed upon him a rich blessing. And after it determined where Canaan and Shemar would dwell, Makar returned to his dwelling place, and Azan dwelt among the people there, and in peace and comfort all of his longings. The end of chapter 2. This reading has been brought to you by Ruach Reformation Assemblies Elder Tasanya Dean. Thank you.